Are you tired of searching online for the perfect guitar stand only to find that they are all too expensive and don't quite meet your need? Why not consider building your own custom DIY guitar stand? It may seem daunting, but the rewards are plenty. Okay, here's how I made my very own DIY instrument stand with leftover wood and paint. I actually contributed $0 to making this. Now, I do a lot of DIY, so I do have a lot of leftover wood and paints and fabrics, and I have tools and things that I would need, but I'll show you what I used to make this. This was a completely free project made out of leftover materials. So first I started by gathering my materials and tools. I needed 2x4s and 2x2s that were long enough to hold my instruments and wide enough to provide stability. Part of the reason I decided to build this is because I realized that all it really was a rectangle on the bottom, a rectangle up the back, and then triangles on the side. So it's a very basic design. I gathered my wood. I also gathered screws to connect the wood. Everything else is optional depending on how polished you want your stand to be and the design. I also used paint, fabric, casters, hooks, a pool noodle, and fabric batting. I was fortunate that I had all of these things left over from other projects, and that is partly what determined what I used. If I had different materials, my design would have been different. I was just challenging myself to make this stand for free. So that's something you might want to keep in mind. Just keep an open mind when you're gathering your supplies, and be willing to be flexible. Measure and cut the wood to the appropriate lengths for your instrument that you want to store. The height of the back rectangle of the stand should allow the necks of the instruments to rest on the horizontal bar. The bottom rectangle should be wide enough to support the bottom of the instruments, but not too wide that they fall through the hole. I didn't do this correctly, but again, being flexible with my own design, I'll show you how I fixed that problem. That the instruments wanted to kind of rest on the floor, and I did not want that. What I did was I used macrame, and I did alternating square knots along the bottom rectangle of this instrument shelf. You can also do it on the sides to assure that instruments will stay secured, and it just adds a little design to the shelf if you're into that aesthetic. If you do your measurements correctly, your instruments won't want to sit on the floor. They'll actually be sitting on the two crossbars at the bottom of the shelf. Diagonal cross beams are added to the sides to make the stand more stable. This beam will go from the top back corner of the back to the bottom front corner of the stand on both sides. And you also want to make sure that this is done at an angle that your stand stays upright. If desired, measure your instrument's width and use a saw to cut notches or grooves in the top crossbar of wood to cradle the instrument securely. I did not do this, but there are different options to make sure that the neck of your instrument doesn't slide around the top bar. I generally keep my instruments in their cases, so this wasn't a real concern, but if I was displaying my guitars and things, I would probably want to have it notched out, and that would take a lot more effort as well, sanding and everything else and padding it, but I would want to have those notches so that the necks of the instruments can be separate. Sand the wood to smooth any rough edges or surfaces after you cut them out, of course, to their appropriate sizes. Screw the stand together. Apply a coat of paint or stain to give it a polished look. Add extra protection for the instruments. Measure foam and batting for the areas of wood where the instruments will rest. Measure and cut fabric to cover the cushioning. Attach to the stand with a staple gun. I used pool noodles and insulation foam to cover the crossbars where I knew the instruments would be resting, and then I covered that with the fabric batting, and then I took fabric that I had picked out that I thought would go well with the paint colors I wanted to use, and just using like basic upholstery techniques of folding it under and then stapling it in place, I was able to create nice protective cushions for my instruments. After that is done, attach casters to the bottom of the shelf if you would like it to be mobile. This is again not required. If you don't choose to add casters, I would definitely put like a block of wood to act like feet on the bottom of the shelf so that your instruments again don't sit directly on the floor. You could also add hooks to the sides of the shelf. These are good to hold smaller instruments instruments like ukuleles and tambourines, anything that kind of can hang. You can put on the sides. You might want to put some of your instrument accessories there. Voila! You've created a simple and functional instrument stand using leftover materials and a touch of creativity. And the best thing about it is that you've made this for free. Please leave a like. Feel free to subscribe to Hey Ma for more DIYs, and anything that sparks your creativity is what we do here. So long.